Welcome back to the On the Down Lowe podcast. I hope everyone is doing well. I feel like that sounded very robotic, but I hope everyone's doing well. My train of thought there is if you're local to me, then I hope you stayed warm, stayed safe with all the ice and the snow that came in from the snowmageddon. So I hope you are all doing well, and thank you for coming back this week. I haven't said that in a little bit, but thank you for coming back. And if you were consistently listening, thank you so much. And sharing the posts and showing the interest that you have in what I have to say. So you're keeping this dream alive, and it makes me want to keep putting out new content and to talk about new areas that interest me, that interest other people, and to keep developing. Recently, it's a lot of development talk. Keep developing as better people going into the new year. Now, you're probably thinking, if you read the title, I thought we were going to talk about a president of some president today, Emily. Well, that's not going to happen. Not this week. Come back next week for that. Next week or the week after, because spoiler alert, we were going to talk about John F. Kennedy. So I thought I was going to do that this week, and then I was like, if I'm going to do this justice, and I'm going to talk about it in the magnitude of how I want to talk about it, and make high school Emily proud, I'm going to put it off a week. I want to spend time going back to first-gen Kennedys all the way up to RFK Jr. I probably sound like a broken record at this point. You're probably tired of hearing it, but I want this podcast to be a reflection of the things that I need to hear at that moment in time, throughout the week, things that I have thought about that I feel other people need to hear, or may need to hear. Something that has been on my mind all week is the idea of resetting your ego. We all have an ego. Whether it drives the boat all the time, or it's just kind of on the back burner every once in a while, we all got one. And whether you can realize it or not is a different question, and part of what we're talking about today. Along with resetting your ego is also resetting your temper, and finding a way to negotiate these personal changes with yourself that isn't going to be a constant personal battle between your dreams and your motivations and your current ego and temper. When I say that this is something that's been on my mind, I mean it. I'm not lying when I say that, because this week, I didn't go to the gym at all. And it wasn't just a coincidental thing, or like I missed one day and then it just kind of trailed off into all day, all the days of the week. It was because I needed to take a step back from the behaviors I was bringing to a gym environment. The first big thing I want to talk about is you may have made some personal change at some point in time. You have lessened your ego, you've had a talk with it, you put it in timeout for a little bit, and now it doesn't lead the ship as much. But that doesn't mean it's gone. I have previously talked about how you may make personality changes, but there's still a little glimpse of those previous mindsets that are gonna tag along with you for the rest of the ride. And ego is no stranger to that. Your current personality may be plagued at some point in times because of the egotistical decisions that you made in a previous mindset. I know I've really been hounding on personality changes recently, but this is something going into the new year I feel everyone needs to at least listen to it. I can't make you absorb what I'm saying. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. But the leading phrase that I want to start this podcast off with in this discussion is, you're gonna keep building the same house if you have the same bricks. So let's change those bricks. Let's change the ego. Let's change the personality that obviously isn't getting you anywhere. And change the temper that is burning bridges that you haven't even crossed yet. And if you're sitting here watching this right now and thinking, I don't need to listen to this, and I don't have that problem, you need to listen to this. Because that's the kind of mentality that's going to break a lot of things. I about just knocked a cup of coffee over. That mentality is the thing that that's going to block you from so many areas of improvement in your life. The feeling that you don't need to improve at all. Or, even worse, that someone or something owes you something. That your favorite phrase to use is, I deserve it. No, you don't. You don't deserve anything. Egos are oftentimes, more than not, come from the development of them feeling the need that someone owes them something. That the only way that they can move forward is the crutch of someone else. I don't want to fret on that too much because I already previously talked about that, but egos come from that source of insecurity. I mean, the truth of the matter is you can't run from your ego. You cannot fully outrun it. Because whenever you try to outrun it, it's only going to make things worse. That's going to make your security even worse. You're going to feel that you cannot outrun an ugly portion of yourself. But that goes for a lot of other things in your life that you're not exactly the most proud of. You're never going to be able to fully outrun it. But you can walk with it, and you can talk it down. Just because you're around something or someone that you don't want to be around, that doesn't mean that you have to give in to their ways. You don't have to lead the example that you're really disgusted in. Egos are often the creation of a participation in something that person was not proud of. They have an ego because at some point in time, they got a grip on themselves. They made the realization that they did something they weren't proud of. They worked past it in some magnitude. They had some success in moving on, so that gave them an edge. That gave them a chip on their shoulder to say that they were better than that aspect of their lives and of someone else's lives. Comparisons of success from yourself to someone else, your ego feeds off of that. Your ego, your red-blooded ego wants to see you feed off of that comparison. That is the biggest reason that I think I had to take a step back from the gym for a week. Because I, at one point in time, had that mentality of comparison. And I felt that if I did something successful that may have rivaled or excelled past someone else's successes, that made me feel better than them. I mean, that's just an honest confession. And some people are afraid to say that. We, at some point in our lives, have had those moments. We don't realize we have an ego. We don't realize that we're letting comparison take over. But every single time that we excel in a portion of our lives in some magnitude, and it does better than someone we're around, our ego gets a high off of that. Comparison and ego are best friends. And when you deprive one of them from the other, that often makes the other one get reactive. When you don't have someone to compare yourself to, someone or something to compare yourself to, your ego becomes so fragile, you become reactive, you get so upset over nothing. When you look back at it in the future, and you've developed and you've moved past that frame in your life, you're gonna go, what in the world was I freaking out about? We've all heard the watered down quote that comparison is the thief of joy. No, comparison is the fuel to the fire of your ego. Comparison, and whenever you do something good or bad in comparison to someone, whether you like them or not, your ego is going to react aggressively in either direction. Many people feel that their ego is a portion of their personality. That goes for a lot of other emotions that you feel. They feel that it is just a constant fixture in their lives. That if they get rid of it, that they're getting rid of a portion of themselves. If that's a factor that you feel is true for yourself, you need to look at the way that you act around people. You need to look at the way that you emotionally feel whenever someone does good or bad. that they do something that they're proud of, or they do something that sets them back a few steps. How are you reacting to that? That's a tough question to answer. Because some people, if you're truly honest with yourself and you feel that you have an ego issue, your answer to that question should make you very uncomfortable. It should make you very uncomfortable once you've developed and you realize that you were acting incredibly immature. But if it makes you uncomfortable, even when you say it to yourself personally, you should not need any other sign to make a personal change. That was another topic that I put on my Facebook post. If you're not friends with me on Facebook, On the Down Lowe podcast on Facebook, I post the things that I want to talk about that week. And I said that I wanted to talk about resetting your ego and truly realizing and acknowledging that you need to make a big personality change. Egos don't like change, okay? And if you say to yourself that you need to make a change, you're going to feel embarrassed. Your ego is going to want to hide. It's not going to go away. It's going to come out in the forms of emotion. It's going to come out in the form of reactivity. Like I said, you cannot fully outrun portions of your life. Portions of your life that you're really unhappy that you once depended on. You can't outrun them. You can walk with them and talk them off the ledge. So, you can't get rid of your ego. You don't think I've tried? Like, I tried to fix that portion of my life by doing that exact thing. By trying to outrun it. But in that way, you're trying to compare yourself. Okay, we're getting super meta right now. If you're trying to outrun your ego, a past portion of yourself, that's still comparison. Okay? But stay with me for a second. That's still comparison. You're still trying to compare yourself to an old version of yourself that you're not proud to say that you once were. You're still going to feed and kind of put preemptive opinions in your new emotional boundaries. You're going to make them a little liquid. If you try to compare your previous self and your now self, and you feel uncomfortable, it's a little bit of the ego talking. We all have to make that realization at some point. You're never going to fully outrun your old personality. But you cannot live your life by constantly trying to sprint and compare yourself to your past self. You have to walk hand in hand with them. As much as it may disgust you, you need portions of that previous knowledge to carry yourself forward. When you take a class, you have to use some knowledge from that class in the next one. You can't just take it and then run away and never talk about it again because you didn't do good in the class or you didn't do X, Y, and Z. You still have to refer back to it. That's the same thing with personality development. You cannot just completely get rid of it and act like that's a different person and treat your past self the same as the way you're treating people that you compare yourself to feed your ego. The key to fixing a broken ego, a broken temper, these two go hand in hand, I mean this is kind of interchangeable, is understanding that you need to communicate with yourself and be personal and honest with your personal self. You may know some people in your life, or you may have seen it somewhere at some point in time, is someone will try to make a ego change. They realize, they acknowledge they have an ego, and they're ashamed of it. That's natural to feel ashamed of a portion of your life, but the true sign of maturity and progress is being able to walk hand in hand with that portion of your life. You don't try to get rid of it and say, no, I'll never do that again. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe X, Y, and Z. That's still a glimpse of previous ego that you think you got rid of. Egos don't just come in the form of over-arrogance. They come in the form of reactivity. And the way of understanding and developing your knowledge. When you have an ego that's so strong and so bitter that just kind of keeps growing and manifesting over time, when you think that you're outrunning it, you're like talking to a brick wall. No one can get through to you. Your ego is now tenfold worse than it was in the previous mindset. In reality, you're not developing because you feel that your way of developing is completely getting rid of all the things, all the connections that you made with your previous self. Going back to the class example, you can't take one class and then get rid of it completely, never reference it again, and just go on to the next level. You gotta refer back. When you take a class and say you don't do good in it, you didn't get a grade that you were proud of, but you still gotta move on to the next level, you're gonna feel a little awkward and a little tense whenever you have to go back and refer to that previous class. It's the same way with managing your ego. When you try to completely outrun a portion of your temper or your ego, whatever it may be, you become very hard to manage both socially and personally. Personally, you're not going to be able to recognize that you're falling back into old patterns. If you try to completely ignore, put on the horse blinders, that you're never going to act that way again, that you're never going to have an ego like that again, you're putting on the horse blinders and you're not realizing the weakness patterns that you're falling into. When you can accept and you can acknowledge that that portion of your life may be small now, but you still have to deal with it. You still have it with you. You cannot completely get rid of it. That is when you realize that you can then take portions of those weakness patterns and give yourself warning signs. That is whenever you're developing. Because whenever you put the blinders on and you think that nothing can touch you, that you can never relapse on this again, that is when you're just going to keep walking in that circular path. You're not going to go forward. And as harsh as that is to understand, when you neglect your previous personality and your previous emotional complex, you are so out of touch with yourself because you feel that you are untouchable. You made this personal decision that you need to change your ego. You feel that you cannot be touched by anything that you consider lesser than that new mindset. You can't be afraid to acknowledge a portion of your life that makes you upset, that makes you tense, something that you used to do that makes you uncomfortable. You still have to acknowledge it, because at one point in time, that is all you had. You were doing what you felt was appropriate. You were portraying yourself in an over-arrogant, egotistical way because you felt that that is what you needed to do to react in that moment. You now know that's not what you need to do, but you cannot get rid of or neglect that portion of your life that was doing what they felt was appropriate at that time. This conversation goes hand in hand with the personality changes episode that I made a few weeks ago. So if you want to hear more on that, go back to that episode. It's on Spotify. Knock yourself out. Going back to what I said about walking in a circular path. What many people don't realize whenever they are just kind of constantly doing the same thing over again because their mindset is not adaptive to this new personality that they're trying to create, they at some point in time start realizing patterns. They walked around this path so many times, they're like, nothing's changing. This is odd. When they make that realization, their inner thinking, their critical thinking, is going to give them every reason in the book why what they're thinking is not true. Why what they're seeing and what they're thinking and what they're trying to critically think through, why that is not so. And why that doesn't bother them, why that shouldn't bother them at all. They will talk themselves down on a huge problem. They'll talk it down to a grain of sand because their ego is so reactive to the possibility of change. Egos are going to stunt your growth 10 times out of 10. Comparison is single-handedly the easiest thing to recognize, but the hardest thing to change. As I said previously, comparison is the fuel that adds to the fire of the ego. And it changes the way that you can think. And it changes the way that you act around people without you necessarily even be able to realize. Comparison is also a social absorption issue that some people have. And what I mean by that is comparison, when you're looking at people and you're picking up on the things and the traits, the mental and physical things that they use to live their lives every day, you're kind of picking up on those traits. Comparison often pulls in some pretty nasty habits because you see other people do it, so therefore you feel that you can adapt it as well. And then whenever those traits end up going sour in your personal life, that's when your ego gets a little reactive. Because you feel that if someone can do it and they do it well, but you can't do it and do it well, then that makes that thing impossible, an impossibility for someone else to be able to do successfully. Absorbed traits that you see from other people, that you got from that comparison portion of your life, are often the things that you're most embarrassed to tell about yourself. You try to mask that portion of your life that you're actually in reality really upset with the arrogance and the over-exaggeration, and that everything is great, is copacetic, and that you are so happy, so overly happy with the way that you are portraying these traits in your life. When in reality, you have a very fragile emotional complex. Sorry, that's just, as harsh as that is, that's what it is. You can't have comparative properties in your life without having the ego right behind it. Like I said, we all have an ego. We all do, whether it's on the back burner or it's the leading line in your life. We all have one. Comparison makes it tenfold worse. Comparison, good or bad. Comparison is single-handedly the biggest source for any type of absorbed traits. And those absorbed traits, whenever you come to the realization that your personality is not coming from you, it's coming from what you're seeing from other people, that makes you really fragile. That makes you want to lash out at people. It makes you feel very bitter and sour about the way that you need to treat others, because you have posed your life, your personal life that you are responsible for handling. You posed it around other people. You're not leading, you're following your life. You're not leading your life, you're following it. You followed the example of others. And that is where broken egos come in. Because when someone sees a person that is pretty secure, in touch with the personal traits that they have made themselves, fragile people with fragile reactive egos will see that as competition. They will mask they will do everything they can to mask their arrogance and the fragile portion of their absorbed traits with over arrogance and confidence. One closing thought to kind of lead this all together and to tie it all together. As someone my age, you don't come out of the womb with security. You're not born with it. You were born with a blank space in your mind, and you have a choice. Many times, more than not, you have to go through those fragile stages of your life. You don't know any better. 90% of people that we're around have that fragile emotional complex. I would almost put money on it. Statistically, put money on it. We will forever be prone to absorbing that type of reactivity. You cannot be mad at yourself or be upset with the way that you previously acted. You've now developed, and you're looking back. You cannot be upset at yourself for doing what you saw was appropriate for that portion of your life, because you didn't know any better. You didn't know that that was breaking you emotionally. You didn't know that the way you were leading yourself was breaking your emotional complex, that it was breaking you down and making you really bitter towards the people that you shouldn't have been bitter towards. It was making you become a version of yourself that you saw in other people, and you weren't proud of those people. You cannot be upset at yourself for doing what you saw fit with the emotional complex that you had at the time. The true test of development, the last time I'll say this, the true test of development is not running from that past self, but walking hand in hand with it and learning from it and realizing the things that went wrong previously and how to avoid those the best that you can in the future. When you run full sprint away from it, you don't have time to learn from it. You're going to keep walking that circular path. You're not going to grow. You're going to become a very jaded version, very jaded, naive of the world around you. And the way that you truly react to people, and the way that you truly spend your time thinking about the things that are going on around you. Your intellectual complex is going to break down so much because you put too much stock in the reality of the moment and not the reality of the past. Put your stock in the reality of the past, because that is where you learn. You can't build tomorrow, and you can't build a new house if you're using the same bricks. You gotta grow. It's time to leave the nest, and it's time to fix your ego. I think I've balked at you enough. But just that's what I like about having platforms like this, is some people need to hear a conversation like this. They may not want to admit it, but the first step to moving forward is admitting it. Is admitting and confronting a portion, big or small, of your life that you need to make a change in. The only person that can make you better is you. There's nothing changes if nothing changes. So, I'm going to leave this here for you, but thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to conversations that aren't exactly the most comfortable to listen to. You may feel called out, but that's good. That's good to feel called out. That's the first step of trying to see a problem. As previously mentioned, I think I'm going to move forward into the historical talk next week with, spoiler alert, John F. Kennedy. So stay tuned for that. It'll be another stretch of probably 3 weeks or a month, similar to the Clintons. So that's all I got for this week. Check me out on social media, On the Down Lowe Pod on Instagram, and On the Down Lowe Podcast on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, check me out on Spotify as well, on the Down Lowe Podcast. And if you're on Spotify, go to the YouTube. Those inverse links will be posted in the description on those platforms. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing to support this dream that I have. So, till next week, y'all take care.